I always thought that if people from another planet ever decided to drop into this earth on this holiday season as we prepare for Christmas and ask the question, who are they celebrating? I have no doubt they would say the guy in the red suit with a long white beard, good old Santa Claus. He's everywhere at this time of year. We can't go anywhere without seeing Santa smiling at us, wishing a Merry Christmas, even in COVID times. You can't sit on Santa's knees these days, but you can still wave at him at the mall with a mask on, behind plexiglass, but at least he's still there. Santa and Christmas really go together, don't they? Especially to the young and the young at heart. There are lots of great stories about Santa. There are lots of great jokes about Santa. Why did Santa bring 22 reindeer to Walmart? Because what he wanted to buy cost $20, but just in case it was more, he bought some extra dough. Or how about this story? This was printed in a newspaper called The Alaskan. According to the Alaskan Department of Fish and Game, while both male and female reindeer grow antlers in the summer each year, male reindeer drop their antlers at the beginning of winter, usually late November to mid-December. Female reindeers retain their antlers till after they give birth in the spring. Therefore, according to every historical rendition depicting Santa's reindeer, every single one of them, from Rudolph to Blitzen, had to be a girl. We should have known. Only women would be able to drag a man in a red velvet suit all around the world in one night and not get lost. The point is, whether we like it or not, in this modern era, the symbol for Christmas for so many people is not a baby in a manger. It is the jolly old elf from the North Pole. Santa has become the spokesperson for Christmas. Especially on a day like today when we are thinking about the quality of joy, Santa is really a symbol for Christmas joy. What do you think about that? Well, to be honest, we could do a lot worse. In so many ways, Santa Claus is a great spokesman for all that is special about Christmas. Think of what he does. He brings toys to children, asking nothing in return, except that they try to be good and do their best. He's full of joy and laughter. He's a good moral model. To my knowledge, he doesn't smoke. He's a happily married man. He eats a little much, but we all have our faults. He's always in a good mood, a positive mood. He's a good listener. He's well organized. He's an enlightened employer, giving work to those who are vertically challenged. He brings with him a sense of magic and mystery, which this season is about. And he's full of love, always ready with a warm hug and a pat on the back. There's no question that Santa Claus is, in so many ways, an excellent spokesman for this season of joy and celebration. But the question I want to explore with you for a few moments this morning is, as good as Santa Claus is he enough? Is he enough to get across to millions of people worldwide every year the importance of this season of Christmas? To begin to answer that question, let me ask you another question. Who is this man called Santa Claus? This person who's become the central figure of our Christmas celebration. I mean, what's his story? What's his history? Where did he come from? To answer that, we need to look back or go back to the Middle Ages, to a dark time in our world's history, a time of war, plagues, slavery, a time of corruption in our political institutions and in our church and spiritual institutions, a time when the rich few, the aristocracy, ruled the roost, and most of the world's population lived in truly desperate poverty. A time when the average lifespan for a man was in his early 30s. It was in this era that Santa Claus was born. The legend of who he was to become began. Let me tell you the true story of Santa Claus. Originally, he was, of course, called Nicholas. Nicholas was a priest who lived in the ancient European town of Myra. You'd find that today in Turkey. He was known for being a kind and a generous man, a good person of faith. One year, the aging bishop of the area took sick and died, and the people of Myra had to elect a new bishop. Unanimously, they elected Nicholas. As soon as Nicholas became bishop, he took time to travel to almost every house in the area, and he discovered the full extent of people's poverty. Each night he prayed as to what to do with this situation. He claimed to have had a dream in which an angel spoke to him and told him to help the people by giving away all that he had. And so he did. He began giving away all his wealth, which for a bishop was quite significant. He gave it away to help others, but the problem was he eventually ran out of things to give away. So he began to give away some of the riches that the church owned. Before long, the archbishop caught wind of what he was doing and told him if he didn't stop, he would be arrested, excommunicated from the church. But Nicholas didn't stop. He knew the authorities were watching him, so instead of distributing money and gifts to others during the day, he started to bring them at night, often donning a disguise so he wouldn't be seen. But it was one incident that really caught people's attention. In town, there were a number of people or families who had caught the dreaded plague. Sound familiar? They'd also been quarantined in their homes. Sound familiar? Nobody was allowed to go in, and nobody was allowed to go out. Guards stood at the door to make sure the quarantines were honored. It became common knowledge that the families inside were literally starving to death. They'd exhausted their food supply, and because no one was allowed in for fear of catching the plague, there was no getting food from the outside. When Bishop Nicholas heard this, it was said that he was filled with concern for those who were suffering. As the story goes, that very night, he filled up one of his bags with food and medicine. He made his way to a quarantined home. Seeing the guard at the door, he realized he couldn't get in the traditional way. He had an idea. Climbing on the roof, he found the chimney, deposited the bag of food and medicine to the hearth below. And the legend of Santa Claus was born. For his incredible works of love and charity, he was considered by all as a saint, and thus he was named St. Nicholas. When he died many years later, the legend began to spread from country to country. The way he brought gifts to people in disguise caught their imagination. They began to celebrate St. Nicholas Day. As the legend went from country to country, it grew and changed and evolved. In Switzerland, for example, there was a belief that once a year, an elf would bring toys to children from the snowy mountains by riding on the back of a flying reindeer. The legend continued to evolve. Somewhere in Germany, St. Nicholas became known as Santa Claus. And when the legend reached the Western world and North America, in all of its parts, it was fused together in a poem by Clement Moore called A Visit from St. Nick, later renamed 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. It was fixed to the Christmas season and entrenched as the legend that we now recognize as Santa Claus. That's the true story. The man we call Santa Claus was originally a Christian saint who believed that following Jesus meant living like Jesus every day. Today, that magic is still alive, and many wonderful things are done every year in his name. Let me share with you another story. In the December 1995 issue of the magazine Visions, which is a publication published by the Kentucky Television Foundation, a guy called Dick Hoffman, director of programming, explained why he believes in Santa Claus. This was his story. 20 or so years ago, Hoffman had planned a holiday party for his co-workers the Monday before Christmas. A few days before the scheduled event, a colleague called and asked if he could bring his 5-year-old son. Although the party was designed for adults, young Brian was given permission to attend. Because Hoffman had already purchased gifts for all the adults, he felt he should provide a gift for the boy, for Brian. While shopping a local store for wrapping paper, Hoffman wandered over to the section of children's toys and games. As he drew closer, his eyes quickly located an inscription that proclaimed, "Suitable for ages 5 and up." Pleased with his good fortune, Hoffman picked up the box to examine its contents. It contained a spirograph set. Remember those? Plastic geared wheels with colored pens, and you could make all kinds of interesting designs on papers. How many people had a spirograph? We all did. It was perfect, neither too expensive nor in need of batteries. He purchased the item, wrapped it, and addressed the tag to Brian. Hoffman continues his story. Monday night came, he said, and we congregated in our conference room for the party. But Brian didn't show up. he developed a cold and had been left home with his sister. But another child had shown up for the party most unexpectedly. One of the reporters on the show, John, had a close friend named Mike. The two men were best friends. Well, during this time, Mike really needed a friend. His wife was seriously ill in the hospital fighting for her life. So Mike had asked John to look after his daughter, Ellen, so that he could stay at the hospital. John agreed, and that's why he brought the little girl to the party. Ellen was 6 and quite bright. She knew something was wrong. It was nearly Christmas. Her mother had been in the hospital for weeks, and her father had sent her off to a party to be with strangers. She was a sad little girl. John said that she had hardly spoken in the days that she had been with them. She would barely eat and would never smile. Hoffman continues. I, of course, he said, had no present for Ellen, but I did have the one for Brian, who had not shown up. Reasoning that Ellen was close to his age and certainly in need of being included in the celebration, I pulled off the tag marked Brian from the gift and put on another tag, to Ellen, from Santa Claus. When it came time to distribute the gifts, I handed Ellen the one with her name on it. She shyly took it, cautiously opened it. When she saw the gift inside, a trace of a smile came to her face for the first time. For the rest of the party, Ellen sat at a table playing with her spirograph, proudly showing her creation to all those around her. About a week after Christmas, he said, I got a phone call from Ellen's father. He told me that his wife had greatly improved. The crisis had passed and she would be all right. Primarily, though, he called to thank me for Ellen's gift and to tell me that he now believed in Santa Claus. It seemed that a couple of weeks before Christmas, Ellen had composed a letter to Santa and gave it to her father to mail. He'd stuffed it in his pocket and forgotten about it with the turmoil of his wife going into hospital. It wasn't until after Christmas that he found the letter in his pocket. He opened it, and in the letter, in her bold child's handwriting, Ellen had asked Santa for only 2 gifts because the first was so big. The first gift Ellen asked for from Santa was that her mother would get well and return home. The other gift she requested was a spirograph set. Hoffman concludes the story with these words. There may be some who would call this coincidence, but I am not so foolish. I realize that Ellen and I were brought together by the Spirit which presides over Christmas. In my heart, I know that Santa Claus, whoever he may be, read Ellen's letter and responded to it as best he could. So now, having heard the story of Santa Claus and the impact that his Spirit still brings today, let me ask you again, is he enough to truly understand what this season is all about? It's a good start, but there still has to be something more. The spirit of Christmas can certainly be captured and celebrated and reflected in Santa Claus, and the kind of joy and celebration and love that he embodies. That can definitely point the way to the Christ child. But there's still one important fact in the story that eludes even St. Nick. And I think it's found when we reflect again on who God called to witness to the birth of Jesus. A group of shepherds watching over their flock. We've cleaned up the shepherds and nicely placed them in our nativity scenes, but I think it's good every year to remind ourselves again of the significance of the shepherds being at the manger. Shepherds in that early society were considered the lowest of the low. To be a shepherd was to be at the bottom of the heap. It was to be scorned upon, laughed at, looked down on. Children were taught in school to never shake the hand of a shepherd, lest they become disease-ridden. And yet, they had the front row seats at the birth of the child. Don't neglect this part of the story, because they remind us of a radical message that the Christmas story brings to us. They highlight an important edge in the story that goes so far beyond the smiling face of Santa Claus. Let me explain it this way. In 1985, in the dark days of apartheid in South Africa, the government of the day made a radical decision. They canceled Christmas. Not for all the people of South Africa, but just for those in the ghettos of Soweto. Soweto is the poorest part of South Africa, the focal point of the anti-apartheid movement. Anybody caught by the soldiers celebrating Christmas would be arrested and jailed. Why on earth would they keep these poor and oppressed people from celebrating such a warm and tender celebration as Christmas? Because the people of Soweto, the black South Africans, weren't out there singing Christmas carols. They weren't trimming trees with tinsel or hanging mistletoe or waiting for Santa or wrapping gifts. If that was all Christmas meant to them, there would be no reason to cancel it. But Christmas was about something very different to them. It was about a promise of freedom and justice. You see, every Christmas day, the people of Soweto would take to the streets, and they were there to proclaim and uphold a very different part of the Christmas story. Where we have our pageants and read the parts of the story about the angels speaking, about the inns being filled and kings coming from afar, when they read the Christmas story, they highlight a very different part of it. For them, the message of Christmas is captured most by the words of the Magnificat, the song of praise that Mary sang that I just read. Again, it goes like this. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor upon the lowliness of his servant. Through this child he will show strength with his arm. He will scatter the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He will bring down the powerful from their thrones and lift up the lowly. He will fill the hungry with good things and send the rich away empty. Think of what hope and life those words would have been to those people in South Africa. And yet we hardly even notice or recognize them when we read the Christmas story. For those people in Soweto, Christmas wasn't about Santa Claus. It was about faith. It was about hope. It was about truly believing that through the birth of the baby Jesus, to the lowliness of Mary and Joseph, the lowliness of the shepherds, that God had a message for them. That God cared about them, that God cared for the lowliest of his people, that God knew their plight, and that the day would come when the powerful would be overthrown. There would be freedom, and there would be equality. It took 10 years, but eventually apartheid would come to an end. But in 1985, Christmas was canceled because of fear that those under the yoke of apartheid may just take the story of the birth of Jesus a little too seriously. Santa Claus may be enough to remind us of the joy and love and the spirit of this season, a spirit of giving and caring for one another, the magic and mystery of what Christmas is all about. We can get all that from the jolly elf from the North Pole. But for the lasting impact of what is celebrated at this time of year, we still need to keep Jesus as the center of the season. For he reminds us that celebrating God's birth into the world isn't just about exchanging gifts, it's about exchanging ideas, old ones for new ones. It isn't just about being attentive shoppers, it's about being attentive to issues of freedom and equality in our communities and around the world. Joy isn't just about laughter and excitement, it's about the feeling that we get in here when we've given hope or life to another. Christmas is about understanding that God so loved the world and so loved us. God's Spirit was manifested into the world through the life of Jesus, the God of hope, the God of peace, the God of joy, the God of love. And every time we live out this gospel message, every time we choose the path of peace and hope, every time we stand for what is good and right, every time we live joyfully instead of with despair, we are partners with God in God's ultimate hope of recreating a world based in grace and love. That's the message of Christmas. And it's a wonderful message, and it's a powerful message, and it can be a life-changing message. And I think that to achieve those lofty goals, we need more than the jolly elf in the red suit. We need the baby in the manger, the child Emmanuel. God is with us. Let me conclude by sharing with you a poem called simply Santa's Prayer. It's by Warren Jennings. The sleigh was all packed, the reindeer were fed, but Santa still knelt by the side of the bed. "Dear Father," he prayed, "be with me tonight. There's much work to do and my schedule is tight. I must jump in my sleigh and streak through the sky, knowing full well that reindeer can't fly. I will visit each household before the first light. I'll cover the world and all in one night. With sleigh bells a-ringing, I'll land on each roof, amid the soft clatter of each little hoof. To get in the house is the difficult part, so I'll slide down the chimney of each child's heart. My sack will hold toys to grant all of their wishes. The supply will be endless, like the loaves and the fishes. I will fill all the stockings and not leave a track. I'll eat every cookie that is left for my snack. I can do all these things, God, only through you. I just need your blessing. Then it's easy to do. All this to honor the birth of the one that was sent to show love, God's most holy Son. So to all of my friends, lest your glory I rob, please, God, remind them of who gave me this job. Amen.